Hello and welcome to watching Newsbreak. I am Vedant Agarwal. Our special focus on the show this evening. With intermittent spells of heavy showers across North India, cities brought to their knees, villages, smaller towns cut off, lives thrown out of gear, and some tragically cut short. In the national capital, rain for a few hours meant roads turning into rivers, water flowing inside houses, and of course, Delhi's eternal problem, nightmarish traffic, with people stuck on the road for hours on end. Severe waterlogging in Delhi claimed the lives of a young mother, her 3-year-old baby, and a 12-year-old boy who died in yet another tragic electrocution incident. The situation, however, is much worse in the hills, but not unprecedented. In Himachal and Uttarakhand, portions of key highways being washed away, houses, office buildings crumbling like a pack of cards. Hundreds trapped after a series of cloudbursts and at least 15 dead in the two states, Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Both the hill states have been ravaged by rain again, something we saw last year as well, with hundreds dead and losses to the states running into hundreds of crores. In God's own country, Kerala, screams for life silenced by death. Over 200 people have died in the Wayanad landslides, the worst tragedy Kerala has seen in decades. The trail of destruction across the country is a grim reminder of our collapsing infrastructure. And years of warnings, reports, red flags, all ignored with no lessons learned. Who is to blame? Unchecked development, corruption, or simply civic apathy? On the show this evening, we ask, why can we never handle the rain? Joining me on the show this evening, I'm being joined by Vimalendhu Jha, Executive Director of Swechha India, also Professor Dr. P.S.N. Rao, Dean of the SPA New Delhi, who is a Professor of Urban Planning. Ulka Kelkar, Executive Director, Climate WRI India, is also with us. Thanks all very much for being with us. Vimalendhu Jha, going across to you first. These are stories that we've heard every year. I mean, this is not unprecedented, whether it's what we're seeing in the hills or in the capital city. The fact of the matter is that our infrastructure is unable to cope with rain year after year. Who is to blame?
See, it's very, very convenient in occasions like these to really blame climate change singularly. Indeed, there's climate change, and therefore there are climate events, and therefore you need to really deal with climate change at the same time. But at the same, right now, if you look at the kind of disaster, be it in Himachal Pradesh, be it in Uttarakhand, be it in Delhi, or for that matter in Wayanad, and I'm only talking about last couple of days, the disaster that's in question. But if you look at the kind of things that's actually happened in the country in last 2 months, this year, and last year, the kind of floods that we saw in Mandi and Shimla and everywhere else. This is a grim reminder of the kind of development model that we are actually following, which is completely unscientific. When we question governance, governance is not just in terms of reaction to climate change, which is also missing. In terms of adaptability, we are not really looking at climate change in an urgent fashion, in a systemic fashion, in a methodological fashion in that sense. And at the same time, the model, as in imagine in the month of August, we actually complain about rain. Yes. And in the month of July, we complain about heat waves in the same Delhi and in the same in the same Manali. And when that is glaring at us, staring at us, what's the kind of governance and economic model that we need to follow? So it is a man-made disaster. In many ways, it's a government, sponsored or in a way enabled disaster that sees the scale and magnitude of the problem that we're actually seeing right now all across the country.
Dr. P.S.N. Rao, come in on this point, because unchecked development is really something that has triggered this kind of ecological crisis across states. It's not just something that is limited to the hill states or the capital city. I mean, what we saw in Joshimath last year, what we saw in, as far as the Silkyara tunnel incident was concerned, this unchecked development seems to be at the core of the issue. And a lot of the times, the voices of, say, the tribals or the people living there very close to, the ecology in a sense, their voices are ignored as well. How do we fix this problem? Because, whether it was a Gadgil report or many such reports which have pointed out that certain areas are just not fit for the kind of development, that we see. So how do we fix this issue? Because it's a multifaceted issue.
Yeah, absolutely. See what you should do, where you should do, and how you should do. This is well known. There are rules, there are regulations, there are codes. All these documents are there, as you also have said just now. But then, who is going to check whether these are being followed or not? I think there is violation galore all across the country, whether it is in the cities, on the outskirts, in the villages. We don't seem to be following any rules and regulations. We take building very, very lightly. We build whatever we want, wherever we want, in complete flouting of all the rules and regulations, and nobody bothers to check on the other hand. So many of these things are all incorporated. What you should build, you should not build on the riverbeds. You should not build on steep slopes. These are all there, but then nobody seems to be following them. And the government agencies, the civic agencies, or what have you, they are supposed to check, but they don't bother. So therefore, it's the people who are building their greed for making more money by building everywhere and anywhere. That is one thing on the one hand, and on the other hand is government turning a blind eye. The local agencies who are supposed to actually monitor and ensure that things are built in a proper manner, they just don't seem to be bothering at all, and that's why you see buildings crumbling and rainwater entering into basements, and all kinds of things are happening. This is all because the rules and regulations are being violated everywhere, whether it's Delhi or whether it's a small town in a remote village in Himachal.
Okay.
So unless and until we take urban planning, city planning seriously, these things are bound to happen again and again. These are all man-made disasters. Yes, we do agree that there is a climate change that's happening, but then we just don't seem to be taking it seriously at all.
That's an important point you're making, and Ulka Kelkar come in on this because the way we talk about climate change, even globally, it's said often that it's the Western countries who contribute the most to climate change, but it's countries like India and the global South that's paying for it. Similarly, looking at climate change, in the landscape of our country, it's mostly urbanization, rapid unchecked urbanization that contributes the most to climate change, and it's people who are really bearing the brunt of it, who are at the margins, whether it's the farmers, whether it's the tribals, people living in villages, in the remotest of areas. So how do we sort of fix this problem? Because we don't often understand the impact of climate change, because whether it is extreme heat, and now it's a pattern, if you see on a year-on-year basis, there's extreme heat followed by unseasonal rain, and then of course rain sort of unleashing this kind of fury across North India, particularly this time around. I mean, what we saw in Wayanad, absolutely an unimaginable tragedy with over 200 people dead. So do we understand that the problem of climate change, it's here and now?
You're absolutely right, Vedant. This has been a huge series of tragedies, and my condolences, my sincere condolences to those who've been affected. We have learned from past tragedies, whether it was the Odisha super cyclone of 1999 or whether it was the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004. And here also, both my fellow panelists and you are absolutely right in saying that this is a human-made tragedy, but in two ways: human-made at the local level and human-made at the global level. At the global level, it is the global climate change that you spoke about, but at the local level, what is happening is that this extreme rain is falling in a city where the drains are paved over, where the water has nowhere to go, or it is falling on hillsides which have been blasted, quarried, deforested, and so we are eroding the resilience that we have. So this is what scientists have been predicting, climate scientists have been predicting for the last 30 years. When they talk about extreme events becoming more severe or more frequent, this is what it looks like. When they use big words like cascading and compounding impacts, this is what it looks like. So I would say that there are 5 things that we should do. First of all, early warning systems. We have been very good at that. But if you look at what happened in Himachal with the Beas River, this is actually a transboundary effect. The Himalayas are warming up more than the plains. So you need cooperation on transboundary early warning systems. Second, my fellow panelists have rightly spoke about climate resilient infrastructure. For example, when bridges or roads or railway lines are built in India, there is a high flood line benchmark that they refer to. But that benchmark is changing and no longer being relevant. So we need to leave room for nature and we need to leave room for error because climate change is going to bring much more unpredictable weather events. The third is ecological zoning. I'll just end with this point. Many of us may know that there are disaster management plans at the local level. There are also local development plans, but these two plans don't speak to each other. So local authorities, even if they want, cannot enforce zoning or cannot prevent construction from happening in the wrong places if these two plans don't overlay each other and the information is not available at the local level.
So you made an interesting point, and Vimlindu Jha come in on this, that a lot of our infrastructure is outdated, and at the policy level, do we not seem to have an understanding of the changing topography? A lot of the topography on the ground has changed because, that also has been a real impact and a ramification of climate change. Whether it's the hill states or even, the upper reaches of the plains, we've seen that a lot of the topography and the landscape has changed, and that is something that we do not understand at the policy level.
Absolutely. So, when imagine in terms of if you just look at Himalayas and the kind of disaster that we actually see in the Himalayas right now is because the hydrology and geology of Himalayas is not into consideration when you actually design a project or conceive a project. As you look at the number of tunnels that's actually been built. In fact, very interesting, and there was a conversation about it last year as well, the roads or the highways that actually have been washed away in parts of Himachal Pradesh were roads that were actually built in a water stream in that sense. So it's not about we actually building on the river actually reclaiming its space. And also the other thing, a lot of time this
that was exactly what we saw in Delhi as well last year when we saw those unprecedented floods in the capital.
Absolutely. And urbanization is not the only problem. The problem of climate change or the climate-related event is not urban anymore. What you see in Wayanad right now is not urban. Of course, urbanization is a phenomenon. It's called, the academic definition of it is called urbanism as a way of life. But right now, this problem is urban plus rural, urban plus semi-urban. It's a national problem, and this is pan-India in many, many ways, and it's only going to get worse. The worst thing is that despite these alarms, these numbers, counting these dead bodies, still we would anticipate, we would think that there would be a rethinking in the model of development. Okay. Where should we mine? How much should we mine? How fancy a road do we actually want? Or how many more buildings do we actually need? That's question is something that the government needs to answer and really rethink about. Otherwise, imagine, and by the way, this year's monsoon mania is not over as yet. As in a couple of days, you and I are going to talk about floods in Delhi because, God forbid, but in the next 3 days, the water from Yamunotri and Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh is going to enter Delhi now. So the problem is not going to be just the rainfall of Delhi, but the rain in the in upstream of Yamuna that's going to actually flood the entire region. And then next month we are actually going to talk about the frothing of Yamuna and so on and so forth. So
and then of course Delhi's annual air pollution crisis as well.
And what do you do about that calendar? The calendar of events that's become. It's almost like a calendar. It's like a festival. It's a pollution festival. It's a heat wave festival. It's a flood festival. And what should we do? We need to allocate resources. We just had a budget and the entire country, or at least the Indian media was talking about the budget. Are we allocating enough resources and political will to actually accept a climate change crisis? Are we accepting that there's a problem in the fancy Gadkari model road development
Though I must mention here that we do have funds earmarked now, of course, under the climate budget. So, but your point is taken that, are we allocating enough resources? And you made an important point there that multiple rivers in the hills are also now flowing above the danger mark. So that is something that should concern us here in Delhi as well. But looking at the concept of urbanization as well, and Professor Rao come in on this, because who is it actually benefiting? Because, you know, the number of deaths we have seen in Delhi itself, of course in the hill states as well, at least 15 people have died. Here in Delhi, people have died of electrocution, of drowning. You know, a young mother and her 2-year-old or 3-year-old son died after drowning. So, you know, absolutely shocking cases. And urbanization is, who is it benefiting? There seems to be a great deal of imbalance when it comes to urbanization.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. See, the gentleman just now spoke about what is the model of development. I think that's a very important point. What are we building for, and why are we building for, and is this the right way to build? Whether it's a dam, whether it's a bridge, whether it's a highway, or whether it is cities. So that is the fundamental question. Number one. Number two, of course, there's a lot of money, but then where are the people? Are the agencies, so-called agencies, who are supposed to do certain things, who are supposed to regulate? Do they have the capacities? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the understanding to manage? Because all this requires a lot of management. You know, population is increasing in a very big way. So people need houses, people need jobs, and they need to live somewhere. So people are moving in hordes from the rural areas into the urban areas, and there is nowhere they can go. So they just build wherever they want to build. Nobody is here to manage, and even those people who are charged, those agencies who are charged with the responsibility, they just don't know how to go about it. So it's not that technology is not available, or it's not that we don't have the understanding capacities in terms of expertise in this country. We have many people who can help governments manage these situations. But then, who is listening? Where is that political will, as has been said just now? So I think there is a host of factors which all come into play, and we are not taking development seriously. I think it's a very short-sighted approach, that we are building roads very fast, or we are building more roads, and therefore now there will be more automobiles, and there will be more air pollution. So what are we doing?
It's almost like
actually?
a catch-22.
You know, yeah. So we need to question ourselves as to what is it that we are doing, and why are we doing this, and what is the end result of all this, and where are we going? So who is doing that long-term thinking? And we are only taking some short-term, immediate kind of steps, that too few and far between. So that is unfortunately where we stand, and we don't think anything beyond cement and concrete. We are not looking at alternative materials. We are not thinking about many of these issues, such as tree cutting, and you know, the kind of agricultural practices that we are adopting, because it's all related to soil fertility and so on. You know, cities are expanding into the peripheral agricultural lands. All that is also related to flooding.
Yes.
So how do you so there is no holistic thinking. There are different silos, there are different departments. You know, even if you just look at roads, for example, there are half a dozen agencies who are looking at roads in Delhi. You know, and then you have a different agency looking at water. When it comes to nalas, it's a different agency. When it comes to the river, it's yet another agency. Then there are interstate problems, water sharing, and so on. So there is more to it than what meets the eye, actually.
Yes, and you made an important point that ultimately we need more political will to sort of look at climate change. But Ulka Kelkar, come in on this as well, because the larger concern here is, how do we build resilience against climate change? How do we build resilience against such catastrophes? Because it's claiming lives month after month. I mean, it was this year that we've seen at least 5 or 6 such major tragedies that we call climate catastrophe. But as all of you are pointing out, they're man-made disasters. What do we do to build resilience against climate change? Because we don't seem to realize the increasing cost of climate change. You have report after report talking about how we need a socio-ecological approach to this. In fact, you just had a World Economic Forum report that actually says that the cost of climate change is perhaps more than even the cost of war.
You're absolutely right, Vedant. I'll give you the example of floods in Bangkok in 2011. Of course, they caused a lot of devastation locally, but because of the global supply chains, the trade, the manufacturing that happens, the GDP of Japan was
Yes.
hit by 4% in that quarter. So there is definitely a huge business cost, and this is on everybody's radar now, not just governments, but also businesses. But how did Bangkok react to this? One of the things that it did was that in the heart of the city, surrounded by a lot of skyscrapers, it built a natural sponge, what is called a sponge city concept. That is an open area with vegetation, with wetlands for excess rainwater to collect. And this is how Bangkok is building its resilience against extreme rainfall events. This problem of too much water at the wrong time and too little water at the wrong time is going to continue under climate change scenarios. We know from basic science that a warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. It won't rain, there'll be a dry spell. And then when it does rain, it is much more intense. So this is going to be our new normal, the new reality that we need to plan for. And our cities, the way we develop them, have to take this into account. Even in our rural areas, as you know, every time there is a flood or a landslide in Kerala, we speak about the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel report or the Kasturi Rangan report. Both of these have scientifically looked at areas which are hotspots, areas which should be designated as eco-sensitive areas, ecologically sensitive. But the Western Ghats report also says that let local people decide what kind of development they want to have there. The local Gram Panchayat, provided it has information, can decide what kinds of activities can be done within the carrying capacity of the ecology, of the geology of the region. So decentralized information, decentralized governance will become ever more important in this scenario of uncertainty and erratic rainfall and temperature under climate change.
All right.
The last thing I'll mention is this very important new Supreme Court judgment where the right to life was linked with the right to protect oneself from the adverse impacts of climate change.
Absolutely.
How do we ensure this right to life? This is something that all of us and every scale of governance will have to think about.
That's right, and that was an extremely important order. I remember the Supreme Court had said that ultimately the impact of climate change actually curtails your right to life and liberty, and that is something that needs to be urgently looked at. I have enough time for closing comments now, starting with you, Vimalendu Jha. What do we need to do on policy level immediately? There's urgent action that we need because lives are being lost every day.
I think we need to pause. We need to really rethink. We can't keep this as business as usual. We can't make this a calendar event. We need to look at this. We need to have a comprehensive timeline to really address issues of climate change. Because this is not a 2024 event. It's going to happen in 2025. And God forbid, it's going to be worse than worse than this year. And therefore, how do we actually address this? Can we actually preempt some of these issues? The next road that we want to build, or the next building that we want to build, or the next tunnel that we want to blast, can we actually take into consideration the geology, hydrology of the area and the local people? What do they want? How broad should the road be? That can't be decided by your capacity or your arrogance and your ego. It has to be the carrying capacity of that land, of that local ecology.
Dr. Rao, your last comments.
The matter is actually very, very complex. And I fear that in the times to come, things are going to go completely out of control unless and until we take some strict measures. So it is very important that already we have several laws, several rules, and several regulations in place. There is absolutely no respect for law in this country, unfortunately. So the first thing that we need to do is that whatever we have, let's follow those rules and regulations strictly, number one. And number two, we need to look at this complex, we need to unbundle this complexity that we're talking about. On the one hand, we're talking about glacier melting, we're talking about rivers, we are talking about water, resource management.
Yes.
And on the other hand, we're talking about how do you house the poor people we're talking about small one-room units and so on. So I think we need to unbundle this entire complex series of events in which there are so many players and so many activities happening. And then what do we do first, and what do we do next, and what do we do thereafter?
Right.
I think a short term,
so all this has to change at the
and
policy level, and the real stakeholders have to be taken into account. Ulka Kelkar, the last word too.
Correct.
Thank you. Usually when these kinds of things happen, it is often framed as a debate of environment versus development.
Yes.
It is not so simple. This kind of development, where entire hills are being quarried, entire forests are being cut down, entire rivers are being polluted, entire cities are being just paved over, is literally killing us. So the kind of policies, the kind of governance, the kind of information methodologies that we use in planning
Right.
needs to take into account two things. One, leave room for nature, and two, leave room for error.
Right.
Because climate change is going to bring more uncertainty and more unpredictability.
I think that's an important point there and a good note to end the show on. Thanks all very much for being with us this evening. This is a story that we will continue to track very, very closely because the cost of climate change is very, very real, and that's something that we're witnessing every single day. That's all the time that we have on the show. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.